Story 1. I am not sure what causes it, but cafeterias seem to have a distinctive smell. Story 2. That weird plastic strawberry smell that kids' toys used to have. Story 3. Honeysuckle grew in a huge bush next to my bus stop. I smelled it every weekday from first grade until 10th grade, when I started driving. Story 4. Amoxicillin, the bubblegum-flavored liquid for ear infections. Story 5. The smell of leather and new shoes instantly reminds me of going to Payless to get new school shoes each fall. I love that smell. Story 6. Chlorine. We had a pool and swam in it every day during the summer. Story 7. The smell of the first day of fall, when the air is crisp and a little chilly, around 7 to 8 in the morning. Story 8. The smell that wet leaves give off while it's raining is tied to my memory of visiting my mom's village when I was a child. Story 9. Diesel exhaust reminds me of all the time I spent with my grandfathers on their farms running tractors and bulldozers. Story 10. The basement smell. If you know, you know. I only notice it at antique malls or thrift stores. It always brings me back. Story 11. Cigarettes are all over the home. People usually don't like the smell of cigarettes. I associate it with home. Story 12. Opening a Blockbuster case and being hit by the mix of plastic, popcorn butter, and disappointment when the tape was not rewound. Story 13. Sawdust. My father was a carpenter and I often tagged along on his jobs. Story 14. Burning leaves and that wood fire smell. I lived in Northern California and I would smell that all the time. Ironically, the city I grew up in has burned to the ground now. Rest in peace, Paradise, California. Story 15. Strawberries or any other berry. I used to have scented erasers. Story 16. Chapstick cherry lip balm. We got those in our stockings every year. The waxy, fake cherry smell always brings me back. Story 17. The green, original Palmolive dish soap reminds me of my kindergarten classroom. The classroom had a sink, and that was the soap my teacher used. It was the only place I recall ever using it. I would smell it every day there. Now, Palmolive takes me back to that time. Story 18. Jergens Cherry Almond Lotion. Grandma always wore it. Story 19. Beeswax candles. I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania and attended a Moravian church. Communion with chocolate milk and sugar cake was for everyone. We all partook at the same time, no lines. I made many sugar cakes as a kid in the youth group. Christmas was all about beeswax. Imagine a couple hundred people in the sanctuary, each holding a lit beeswax candle. I bring out my beeswax candles every Christmas. Story 20. Scented Crayola markers in kindergarten always had an overwhelming fake grape smell. They also came as stamp markers. The Scholastic Book Fair had the smell of fresh plastic bookmarks, rubber erasers, and brand new books. Story 21. Chlorine and hot pavement with a hint of sunscreen. It instantly takes me back to summer pool days and pruny fingers. Story 22. Lilac. There was a large bush outside my parents' front door. The smell always brings me home. Story 23. Horse manure. A horse farm was right behind my childhood house. Laughing out loud. Story 24. The first faint smell of a cigarette being lit by a Zippo. Story 25. The smell of fresh-cut grass after a summer rain instantly transports me to childhood soccer mornings. Story 26. The first slightly dewy, chilly fall morning. Something about it instantly takes me back to the first day of school. Story 27. The smell of honeysuckle takes me back to my childhood in Georgia. Story 28. Chlorine and bleach. I loved going to the pool so much that my hair always had a slight green tinge. When someone cleans with bleach or bombs their pool with chlorine, I actually like the smell. I know it is not good in high concentrations and I do not care. Story 29. The floor polish and cleaning products used in schools have a distinctive smell. I went to my nephew's school concert last year and was transported back to my childhood as soon as I smelled it. Story 30. The old book smell from the library made me spend hours there. Story 31. Burnt orange peels. Tropicana field in Florida burned them all the time, and the scent traveled for miles. Story 32. There is a certain kind of air freshener in a can from the early 1990s. I occasionally catch a whiff of the same scent coming from the bathrooms of small Asian restaurants. Story 33. It's more about the way the water smells and tastes coming out of the garden hose. Story 34. A fresh vinyl shower liner smells like a new doll on Christmas morning. Story 35. Germex is the brand used in the computer lab. It has a very distinct smell compared to other hand sanitizers. Story 36. The smell of manure reminds me of spending Friday nights at my aunt's house outside of town, past farmland, when my brother and I were kids. Story 37. Bubblegum-flavored fluoride that we would all take together in class. Story 38. Raspberries. When I was a child, my grandfather had a large garden, and I ate raspberries straight from the bush. Story 39. The smell of our public library is hard to describe, but it was a mix of book bindings and a cleaning product. Story 40. Because I had a spoiled childhood, I am very nostalgic for the smell of the water on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. Story 41. Eucalyptus trees are especially beautiful after rain. They grew all around our neighborhood. Story 42. This is very specific. It is the smell of holiday decorations in a storage box. It is similar to the smell of fake flowers, a little more dusty and plastic. I remember that smell every year when we took the holiday boxes down from the attic to decorate. I loved it. Story 43. Honeywort. I am in Germany, so this may not be the international name or the correct translation. It is a houseplant with blossoms that form clusters of tiny star-shaped flowers. Its leaves are thick and waxy. When it blooms, it is not only beautiful but also smells wonderful, a mix of floral and honey. My mom always used to tell me when it began to bloom so I could smell it, and a little later the scent would fill the whole room. Story 44. The smell of the cafeteria preparing for lunch and the library during the first weeks of school. Story 45. My grandparents had an old farmhouse with a door leading to the upper floor. They usually did not go upstairs because everything they needed was on the main floor. When we visited, the air smelled slightly dusty and musty. I am 52 now, and I miss them very much. Story 46. There was a certain chemical-like smell that the lightning bugs gave off when we captured them in glass jars and later released them. Story 47. The smell of a school cafeteria. I haven't smelled it in over 10 years, and I can still remember it as if it were 5 minutes ago. Story 48. Fresh oatcakes. We made them when we were about 6 at my tiny village school in Scotland. The smell instantly transports me there. Story 49. Tobacco pipes. I used to go watch baseball games with my great-grandpa on a 12-inch tube television in the late 1980s, and he would be burning heaters in his pipe while I sat next to him. You do not smell them that often anymore, but anytime I do I feel like I am sitting right in that chair, 12 years old again. Story 50. Beer brewing. I grew up across the street from a brewery. Story 51. Crayola crayons, pencil shavings, and Mr. Sketch markers. Story 52. Rain hitting hot tarmac in the summer is absolutely divine. Story 53. Freshly baked ginger snaps from the Christmas season. Yummy. Story 54. The smell after rain always reminds me of summer break. Story 55. The smell of the surf is not just the ocean, you have to be in it or up close to get it. Story 56. Jergens Cherry Almond Lotion. My mom used to put it on her hands and face every night before she tucked me in. Story 57. I put my face directly above the air conditioning vent. It smells so good and reminds me of being hot as a child when I came inside after playing outside all day. Story 58. The smell of latex gloves at the dentist. Story 59. There is a specific construction paper that always transports me back. Story 60. A mimeograph machine in the school office. The smell of a new reader and cut grass. Story 61. Wet doll hair, like when you took your Barbies in the bath. My nieces do this now, and one night I was trying to untangle a doll's hair when the smell hit me. I used to spend an hour in the tub with my mermaid Barbie, just playing pretend. Story 62. The new workbook smell. I'm old, We had workbooks for every subject instead of computers. Story 63. My fiancé isn't a big coffee drinker, and I don't drink it at all. But in winter he makes it more often. I found out several years ago that he brews the same brand my grandfather did. So every winter I wake up to the smell of Grandpa's coffee, and it immediately transports me back to summer vacations on the coast. Grandpa passed in January. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel when I wake up one morning soon to that smell. Story 64. There's a creek by the park I used to visit. The fence was made of wood that smelled strong when wet. Whenever I walk past, I stop and sniff it. I no longer care what people think. Story 65. When the sun shines after it rains, you can smell the earth as the water evaporates. Story 66. Germaline. I think that's how it's spelled. The old creamy version, though not the new gloopy one. Story 67. The smell after a sunny day when droplets of rain fall to the ground is wonderful. Story 68. Crushed up Tylenol in water. But I can still taste it 40 years later. Story 69. When you enter someone else's house and it has a strange, unfamiliar smell, as if something is being cooked, the house often feels warm. I like that warmth. It is actually the main reason I visit people. Story 70. Matches or cigarettes. My dad was a smoker, as was my grandfather. Both preferred to use matches to light their cigarettes. Story 71. I used to have picnics on my driveway with only my brother and a jug of apple juice. Story 72. I lived with my grandma for a while, and I always had a friend in school who would sniff my jacket and tell me it smelled like grandma's house. He loved it. I still have no idea what that means. Story 73. The smell of perming fluid takes me back to childhood. My grandmother was a hairdresser who owned a salon. Story 74. There was this cherry chapstick I used for the longest time. Anytime I smell it, I'm instantly taken back. Story 75. Orange dial soap takes me back to the art room sink when I was a child. Story 76. Live Christmas trees, pretzel sticks, crayons, and bomb pops. My grandma always had some in her old pantry when we would visit. Story 77. I used to go on walks with my grandparents. A patch of honeysuckle grew on a tall fence that we would always stop by. Story 78. Plastic pool floats, sharpened pencils, blacktop, sunscreen, fresh cut grass, crayons. Story 79. Crayons, specifically if they are all beat up and in a large plastic box, laughing out loud. Story 80. When it rains on a hot summer day, I don't know why, but the smell of nature takes me back to my early childhood. Story 81. Grapefruit reminds me of Christmas at my grandparents'. Story 82. The smell outside after it rains is called petrichor. Story 83. The ocean's salty smell reminds me of the tears I shed, which laid the foundation for my failures. Story 84. I made gingerbread cookies in kindergarten and was very excited, but I quickly realized I did not like them. Story 85. Walking into Chuck E. Cheese or Pizza Hut and smelling the pizza meant good times ahead. Story 86. Dew and fresh cut grass. Yeah, I lived in the suburbs. You want to fight about it? Story 87. Lucky Charms. Even when I see the box on the shelf, I think about childhood. Story 88. I had relatives in Arizona. When my family visited in the evening, I could smell the desert, the irrigation sprinklers over the valley near the river, and the cantaloupe fields. Story 89. Honeysuckle. The scent after a long heat, when it rains and the ground and moss smell very strong. Story 90. Freshly printed school worksheets. The ones you feed through a round drum that come out slightly damp and purple. That smell would bring me back. Story 91. I like cedar, especially freshly cut cedar planks. I don't know why. Story 92. Marks and Spencer Forest Fern Hand Cream. My grandmother used it all the time, and it makes me think of her. Story 93. Horse and cow manure. I grew up on a 100-acre farm. I found my best fishing worms under those piles. Story 94. The smell of laundry detergent at night as you walk through the neighborhood. Story 95. Angel's breath. Yan kasi pinupulbo sa amin noong bata kami. Story 96. It is gym class, and they just open the equipment closet. You approach and smell it. If you know. Story 97. Peppermint has strong associations for me. My mother, grandmother, and several aunts used to hold a Christmas candy-making event. Hand-pulled butter mints made the house smell wonderful for days, with hot butter, sugar, and real peppermint extract. Story 98. A honeysuckle my parents grew outside their bathroom window for privacy. When the window was open, it filled the house with its heady, sweet scent. Story 99. Chocolate chip cookies are baking in the oven, and the Old Spice cologne of my grandfather makes me laugh out loud. Story 100. A honeysuckle bush where I spent a lot of time playing outside. Story 101. Camphophonique. My stepmom used to put it on all my mosquito bites because they were large and I picked at them. It smells awful and burns intensely. Story 102. Creosote. I do not think it is allowed anymore, but it is a wood stain that instantly takes me back to summer holidays in the 1980s. Story 103. Freshly baked cookies. My mom made chocolate chip cookies and still does. Her mother made snickerdoodles and my dad's mother made chocolate chip brownie cookies. Story 104. Cow manure. I weirdly like the smell now as an adult because I kinda miss those cows. Story 105. Water from the hose has a very specific smell that always takes me back. Story 106. The smell of heaters kicking on and burning off dust reminds me of my former school, with vinyl tiles and water-stained carpets. If you had asked my younger self, I would have thought the walls were built with the smell of mildew. Story 107. A few days ago, I smelled sprinkler water, and it took me right back. Story 108. CoverGirl Powder Compact Foundation. My mom always smelled like it. Story 109. Sounds crazy, maybe, but Barbie had a smell that was somewhere between rubber and vanilla. Story 110. Honeysuckles indicate a pleasant smell. Low tide indicates a bad smell. Story 111. Hot creosote. The whole family went to the Central Florida Fair in Orlando sometime in the 1950s. It was a day off for all schools. We parked blocks away and walked to the entrance. We had to cross railroad tracks in the downtown area, and the smell of creosote was very strong. Since then, I have always associated that smell with the fair and with childhood. I love that smell. Story 112. The crisp winter morning air makes you want to wake up for school. Story 113. Chlorine makes me feel so happy. It reminds me of a hotel pool on vacation. Story 114. Piles of fall leaves. I have lived in California most of my adult life, so I do not get to smell them. Story 115. The chlorine at public pools always drew me in. I used to beg to go swimming. It was my favorite thing to do as a kid. Story 116. Weirdly, I could smell hops brewing. I grew up downwind from a brewery and smelled it every morning until it shut down in my teens. Story 117. The smell of brownies or chocolate chip cookies baking filled the house. My mom made them from scratch and had them warm from the oven when we got home from school. Story 118. When summer turns to autumn and you get the first hint of rain on dead leaves, it smells just like going back to school. I am nearing retirement, and it still gives me the shivers. Story 119. There was a smell I associate with holiday in hallways. It was the smell of cigarette smoke, probably moldy air conditioning, and swimming pools. The halls were always carpeted, so I guess that held the smell. It may sound horrible, but I was always happy when we stayed at a motel with a swimming pool. I was walking down the cold hallway in my wet swimsuit, a hotel towel around my neck, and flip-flops. A mid to late 1960s motel. Story 120. My elementary school bought certain kinds of soap, often the pink liquid type found in public restrooms. Story 121. Onions and garlic are cooking in olive oil. Freshly sliced tomatoes were grown by my father in the backyard. Story 122. Longleaf pine needles take me back to spending Christmases on an island in South Carolina with my grandfather. It was not about wealth. He was stationed on the island as an enlisted man. He and my grandmother bought a house in the 1940s and raised their children there. Story 123, Hershey's chocolate. I grew up near Hershey, Pennsylvania, and could smell it some mornings on the way to school. Story 124, sunscreen and the plastic smell of inflatable beach balls. Story 125, nothing beats that classic smell of grass after a summer rain. It always reminds me of playing outside until my mom yelled for dinner, and I pretended I didn't hear her. Story 126, scratch and sniff stickers, banana Laffy Taffy, pipe smoke, clean school smell. Story 127, orange blossoms. I was raised in Central Florida and still live here, but there are not as many orange trees these days, regrettably. My grandfather's harvested orange blossom honey. Sweet memories. Story 128, the smell of new digital versatile discs and video home system tapes is great. I would even say the tapes smell stronger, though I grew up mainly with digital versatile discs. Story 129, a wood-burning fireplace. In the reservation where I grew up, many houses used wood to heat their homes instead of gas. Story 130, the butane scent of a flip-open lighter reminds me of my father. He smoked, and the sound it makes brings him to mind. Story 131, I loved camping with my parents and continued doing so into adulthood. There is nothing better than the smell of a slightly stale campfire on someone's clothes. Story 132, crayons, Play-Doh, books, rain on hot pavement, indoor swimming pools. Story 133, the smell of freshly cut grass in summer instantly brings me back to playing outside as a kid. Story 134, the yeasty scent of homemade beer takes me back to the little hallway between my grandparents' house and the addition they built. My grandfather used to brew there. I am 43, and every time I smell dark beer or the scent of brewing, I am transported to that hallway in the summertime. He has not made it in probably 20 years, but it still makes me smile. Story 135, tempera paint that we used for finger painting had a soft, slippery texture. It was fun. Story 136, the smell of water from the hose on hot concrete evokes summer. Story 137, my grandmother was an amazing baker and often made bread. The aroma of baking bread, especially my mother's sourdough, became my favorite. Story 138, Play-Doh, scratch and sniff stickers, opening a brand new Barbie, Downy fabric softener, cigarette smoke, and my school lunchbox. Story 139, fresh baked bread, homemade. One sniff and I am 9.5, sitting at grandma's dining table, buttering a fresh slice and waiting for grandpa to hand me the honey. Good times. Story 140, the plastic smell when you open a slip and slide or an inflatable pool toy. Story 141, you know the smell of the road right after the rain. That is the peak smell of childhood. Story 142, I cannot really describe it, but sometimes I notice an odor like the hallways of my grandmother's old apartment building. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.